They keep asking the same question because they can't accept the simplest answer. Who's helping you? They look at your progress and assume there must be someone behind the curtain, someone giving you information, someone opening doors, someone warning you before the pressure arrives, someone teaching you how to stay 3 steps ahead. Because in their minds, you couldn't possibly have figured it out alone. And that's where it gets interesting. They've been searching everywhere except the one place they should have looked. Right in front of them. They watched you struggle. They watched you disappear for a while. They watched the noise get louder while you got quieter. They thought the silence meant you were losing. They thought the setbacks had finally exposed your limits. They thought you needed somebody to rescue you from the situation. But they misunderstood what was happening. You weren't waiting for help. You were becoming the help you kept looking for. Every mistake taught you something. Every betrayal sharpened your judgment. Every disappointment forced you to stop expecting people to carry what you were supposed to carry yourself. You started paying attention differently. You stopped announcing every move. You stopped explaining every decision. You stopped needing everyone to understand what you were building. And suddenly, the same people who used to underestimate you started asking questions. How did you know? Who told you? Who's behind this? They need a complicated explanation because the simple one makes them uncomfortable. You learned. You adapted. You observed. You stayed patient. And while everyone else was busy watching your circumstances, you were studying yourself. That's the part they missed. The person helping you was the version of you that refused to stay broken. The version that learned from every failure instead of worshiping it. The version that stopped begging for validation and started demanding discipline. The version that realized nobody was coming to create the life you kept imagining. So you became dangerous in the most realistic way possible. Not because you became fearless, because you learned how to move while afraid. Not because you suddenly became smarter than everyone, because you finally stopped wasting your intelligence trying to impress everyone. And now they're looking around, searching for the secret behind your transformation, while the answer has been standing in front of them the entire time. The person they overlooked, the person they underestimated, the person who finally decided to stop waiting for permission. They keep asking who's helping you, because your progress doesn't make sense to them anymore. Not because you became some impossible person overnight, but because they never paid attention to what was happening when nobody was watching. They saw the old version of you. They remember the hesitation, the mistakes, the bad decisions, the moments when you questioned yourself. So when you suddenly become calmer, sharper, more disciplined, they need an explanation that protects their old opinion of you. Someone must be helping you. Someone must be giving you advice. Someone must be opening doors. Someone must be telling you what to do. Because admitting that you figured it out yourself creates a much more uncomfortable question. If you were capable of changing all along, why did they underestimate you so badly? That question is where their confidence starts to crack. They watched you struggle and assumed the struggle was your identity. They confused a difficult chapter with the entire story. They saw you lose something and assumed you were finished. They saw you become quiet and assumed you had nothing to say. They saw you step away from certain people and assumed you were isolated. They never considered that you might have been studying your mistakes, studying people's behavior, studying your reactions, studying the situations that kept repeating themselves. You started noticing patterns. You started realizing that not every argument deserved your attention. Not every insult required a response. Not every opportunity deserved your energy. Not every person deserved access to your plans. You stopped treating every emotion like an instruction and started questioning what your emotions were trying to teach you. That kind of change doesn't make much noise. There is no announcement, no dramatic speech, no warning. One day, you simply stop behaving like the person they remember. And that is when the questions begin. Who told you that? How did you know? Who is advising you? Who is helping you make these decisions? They search for a person because they don't want to acknowledge the process. They didn't see the nights when you replayed your failures in your head. They didn't see you questioning your choices. They didn't see you forcing yourself to keep moving when motivation disappeared. They didn't see the countless small decisions that slowly turned into discipline. They only see the finished product, and people love results. They just don't always respect the process that creates them. So when your behavior changes, they create theories. Maybe someone trained you. Maybe someone warned you. Maybe someone gave you information. Maybe somebody powerful is standing behind you. But sometimes there is nobody. Sometimes there is simply a person who got tired of repeating the same mistakes. A person who finally became honest with themselves. A person who stopped expecting everyone else to understand. A person who realized that waiting for rescue was becoming another form of weakness. You didn't suddenly receive a secret advantage. You started using the advantages you already had. Your attention, your patience, your ability to observe, your ability to stay quiet, your ability to learn, your ability to walk away before your emotions make the decision for you. That is why your transformation confuses them. They were watching for an outside force. They never noticed the internal battle. They never noticed how many versions of yourself you had to destroy just to become more disciplined. They never noticed how many habits you had to abandon. They never noticed how many times you had to choose the difficult option while everyone around you was choosing comfort. Now they look at you and see confidence. They don't see the uncertainty that came before it. They see control. They don't see the chaos you had to overcome. They see patience. They don't see all the moments when you wanted immediate results. They see someone who seems difficult to manipulate. They don't see how many times you had to learn the hard way. And because they cannot see the work, they invent a person behind it. Someone is helping you. Someone must be. Because the possibility that you became your own greatest source of guidance is far more difficult for them to accept. The person they keep searching for has been standing right in front of them the entire time. You started noticing something strange once you stopped explaining yourself. The less you talked, the more people started watching. The fewer details you gave them, the more questions appeared. They wanted to know what you were thinking, what you were planning, what you were doing next. And for the first time, You realized that silence wasn't emptiness. Silence was control. You used to explain everything. Why you made a decision, why you walked away, why you changed direction, why you stopped answering certain people. You thought if you explained yourself clearly enough, people would understand. But eventually, you discovered something uncomfortable. People don't always misunderstand you because your explanation is unclear. Sometimes they misunderstand you because accepting the truth doesn't benefit the story they've created about you. So you stopped arguing with their version of you. You stopped defending every decision. You stopped giving people a detailed map of your intentions. And something changed. Your actions became louder than your explanations. When you stop announcing every move, people lose the ability to prepare for a version of you they already understand. They can't predict what you will do based on what you said yesterday, because you're no longer giving them yesterday's information. That doesn't mean becoming dishonest. It means becoming selective. Not everyone needs access to your plans. Not everyone needs to know what you're building. Not everyone deserves to hear what you're worried about. Not everyone who asks a question deserves the complete answer. You learn that privacy isn't weakness. Sometimes privacy is simply maturity. You can have goals without broadcasting them. You can make decisions without asking 10 people for approval. You can walk away without writing a paragraph explaining why. You can improve without making an announcement. And when you do that consistently, people begin to notice the difference. They notice you're harder to provoke. They notice you don't react immediately. They notice you listen more than you speak. They notice that when everyone else is rushing to prove something, you're watching. That's when silence becomes powerful, because silence gives you time. Time to observe what people reveal when they think you aren't paying attention. Time to recognize patterns. Time to separate facts from emotions. Time to decide whether a situation actually deserves your energy. Most people respond too quickly because they are desperate to control how others perceive them. Someone says something about them, and they immediately respond. Someone questions them, and they immediately defend themselves. Someone misunderstands them, and they immediately try to correct the misunderstanding. You stopped doing that. Not because you stopped caring, because you started caring more about where your energy goes. You realize that every reaction has a cost. Every argument takes something. Every unnecessary explanation gives someone another piece of information. Every emotional response can reveal more than you intended. So you became slower, not weaker, slower. You started giving yourself a few seconds before answering. You started asking whether the response would actually improve the situation or simply satisfy your ego. You started understanding that winning every conversation is not the same thing as winning your life. And suddenly people couldn't read you as easily. They couldn't tell whether you were angry. They couldn't tell whether you were worried. They couldn't tell whether you had already made your decision. They couldn't tell what you knew. That uncertainty made them uncomfortable, because people feel safer when they can predict you. They feel powerful when they know what will make you react. They feel confident when they know which buttons to press. But when you stop giving them those buttons, the game changes. You don't need to intimidate anyone. You don't need to threaten anyone. You don't need to prove that you're in control. You simply stop handing control away. Your silence becomes the space where your discipline grows. Your patience becomes the place where better decisions are made. Your restraint becomes the difference between reacting to a moment and protecting your future. And while they're wondering why you suddenly became so quiet, you're using that quiet to think, observe, prepare, and move without needing anyone to understand what you're doing. Because sometimes the strongest response isn't a response at all. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can give a situation is your silence. And sometimes the people searching for your next move become distracted because they cannot hear you making it. They thought the failures were proof that you weren't capable. They saw the mistakes, the losses, the doors that closed, the plans that collapsed, and they quietly built a conclusion around you. They assumed every setback made you weaker. They didn't understand what was happening underneath. Failure was teaching you, not gently, not politely. It taught you through consequences, through disappointment, through uncomfortable realizations you couldn't ignore. Every time something went wrong, you were forced to look at yourself without the excuses you used before. You had to ask difficult questions. What did I miss? Where did I rush? Why did I trust that person? Why did I ignore that warning? Why did I keep repeating the same pattern? Those questions changed you. You stopped treating failure like an insult and started treating it like information. That was the shift. Before, losing could destroy your confidence. One mistake could make you question everything. One rejection could convince you that the entire path was wrong. But eventually you realized that a failed attempt wasn't a final judgment on your ability. It was evidence. Evidence that something needed to change. Maybe your strategy was wrong. Maybe your timing was wrong. Maybe your expectations were unrealistic. Maybe you were giving your energy to the wrong people. Maybe you were trying to force something that required patience. Once you understood that, failure became less frightening. You started paying attention. You noticed what worked. You noticed what didn't. You noticed which people appeared when things were going well and disappeared when things became difficult. You noticed which promises were real and which were simply words. You noticed how quickly emotions could make you abandon a good decision. Every mistake became another piece of information, and information, when you actually use it, becomes experience. That's why the person standing in front of people today can look so different from the person they remember. They remember the failure. You remember the lesson. They remember when you lost. You remember what that loss taught you. They remember the moment you were embarrassed. You remember what you promised yourself afterward. That's the difference. Your scars became notes. Your disappointments became instructions. Your setbacks became corrections. You stopped asking, "Why does this keep happening to me?" You started asking, "What is this trying to show me?" That question changes everything, because once you stop seeing yourself as a victim of every difficult situation, you begin looking for your responsibility inside it. Not because everything is your fault. It isn't. Sometimes people betray you. Sometimes circumstances are unfair. Sometimes opportunities disappear for reasons you couldn't control. But even when you can't control what happened, you can control what you learn from it. And that is where your power starts returning. You became harder to surprise because you've already experienced certain patterns. You became more patient because rushing had already cost you. You became more selective because trusting blindly had already taught you the price. You became quieter because explaining yourself to everyone had already drained you. You became more disciplined because motivation had already proven unreliable. You didn't become different because life suddenly became easier. You became different because life became your teacher. Every difficult season left something behind: a lesson, a boundary, a skill, a new standard, a better question, a stronger instinct, a clearer understanding of yourself. And people who only see the present don't realize how much history is standing behind it. They see you making a calm decision and wonder where that confidence came from. They don't know how many bad decisions taught you to slow down. They see you walking away from something without begging for another chance. They don't know how many times you stayed too long before learning that self-respect sometimes means leaving. They see you refusing to react. They don't know how many times reacting emotionally created consequences you never wanted to repeat. They see the discipline. They don't see the failures that made discipline necessary. So let them wonder. Let them create their theories. Let them assume someone trained you. Because they may never understand that your teacher was every mistake you survived, every disappointment you studied, every loss you refused to waste, every uncomfortable truth you finally accepted, every moment that forced you to become more honest with yourself. You didn't escape failure. You extracted something from it. And while they were counting how many times you fell, you were quietly counting how many lessons you could carry forward. There comes a point when you realize something uncomfortable. Nobody is coming to save you from every difficult situation. Not because people don't care about you, but because your life cannot be built around waiting for someone else to carry what belongs in your hands. That realization can hurt, but it can also set you free. You stopped waiting for the perfect person to appear. You stopped expecting someone to understand every struggle before you were willing to move. You stopped believing that motivation would arrive before action. You started understanding that sometimes you have to move first, even when confidence hasn't arrived yet. That was when you began becoming your own source of strength. You didn't suddenly become fearless. You simply became tired of letting fear make every decision. You still had doubts. You still had moments when you questioned yourself. You still had days when everything felt heavier than it should. The difference was that you stopped treating those feelings as commands. Fear could speak. It just didn't get the final vote. You started solving problems instead of constantly explaining them. If something went wrong, you looked for the next move. If someone walked away, you allowed yourself to feel it, then asked what you could learn. If an opportunity disappeared, you looked for another path. If your original plan failed, you adjusted the plan instead of immediately abandoning the goal. That kind of independence changes a person, because when you realize you can survive disappointment, you stop being terrified of disappointing people. When you realize you can rebuild, you stop desperately holding onto things that are already falling apart. When you realize you can stand alone for a while, you stop accepting bad company simply because silence feels uncomfortable. You began understanding the difference between needing people and depending on people for your identity. You can appreciate support without making support your foundation. You can listen to advice without surrendering your judgment. You can accept help without becoming helpless. And that balance made you stronger. People may have assumed that your strength came from having powerful connections, perfect circumstances, or someone constantly guiding you from behind the scenes. But real strength is often much less dramatic. It's waking up and doing what needs to be done when nobody is cheering. It's keeping your word to yourself when nobody would know if you broke it. It's continuing the work after the excitement disappears. It's making the responsible decision even when the easier decision feels better. It's learning to regulate your reactions when anger wants to take control. It's accepting that some problems cannot be solved in one day and still showing up the next day. That is the kind of strength people don't notice immediately. There is no spotlight on it, no applause, no audience, just repetition, and repetition creates character. You began trusting yourself because you kept proving to yourself that you could handle difficult moments. Not perfectly, not without mistakes, but you handled them. Every time you solved a problem you thought would destroy you, your confidence gained another layer. Every time you survived a period you thought you couldn't survive, you became less afraid of the next one. Every time you chose discipline over impulse, you became more difficult to control from the outside. That's why your independence may look mysterious to people who only knew the older version of you. They remember when you needed reassurance. They remember when you needed approval. They remember when you hesitated. But they don't see all the private decisions that built the person standing there now. They don't see the conversations you had with yourself. They don't see the promises you made after disappointment. They don't see how many times you had to pick yourself up without announcing it. So when they ask who is helping you, they may be looking for another person. But sometimes the answer is much simpler. You learned how to help yourself. You became more responsible for your choices. You became more patient with your progress. You became more honest about your weaknesses. You became more deliberate with your energy. And most importantly, you stopped waiting for someone else to give you permission to become the person you already knew you could become. The strength they are trying to locate outside of you was being built quietly inside you. One decision, one setback, one disciplined morning, one uncomfortable lesson, one difficult choice at a time. They look at you now, and they think there must be somebody behind it all. Someone gave you the confidence. Someone taught you the discipline. Someone showed you the path. Someone must have whispered the right words at exactly the right moment. Because they remember the old version of you. They remember when you questioned yourself. They remember when you reacted too quickly. They remember when disappointment could completely change your direction. They remember when you explained yourself to people who had already decided what they wanted to believe. So when they see you operating differently, their minds search for an outside explanation. They don't immediately think of growth. They think of assistance. That's because transformation is usually invisible while it's happening. Nobody sees the small decisions. Nobody sees you choosing not to respond. Nobody sees you putting your phone away and focusing on something important. Nobody sees you waking up without feeling motivated and doing the work anyway. Nobody sees you changing your habits one at a time. Nobody sees you questioning the people you once trusted blindly. Nobody sees you sitting alone with uncomfortable truths because you finally realized that avoiding them was costing you more than facing them. They only see what those decisions eventually produce. They see the calmer version. They see the more focused version. They see the person who doesn't react to every little thing. They see someone who seems harder to manipulate, and suddenly the theories begin. Who helped you? Who changed you? Who gave you that advice? They want a name. You have a process. That's the part they don't understand. You weren't transformed by one conversation. You were transformed by hundreds of small moments that forced you to become more honest with yourself. You learn that some people only support you when your growth doesn't threaten their position. You learn that some advice sounds helpful, but is really designed to keep you predictable. You learned that constantly explaining your intentions gives other people opportunities to judge plans they were never responsible for building. You learned that not every battle deserves your participation, and slowly your standards changed. The things you tolerated before became unacceptable. The distractions that once controlled your attention started looking ridiculous. The approval you once chased started feeling less important. The need to prove yourself started disappearing. That doesn't happen because someone gives you a secret formula. It happens because reality keeps teaching you until you're finally willing to listen. Pain can teach you. Failure can teach you. Loneliness can teach you. Disappointment can teach you. Success can teach you too, if you're humble enough to study what created it instead of becoming addicted to the applause. Your transformation came from paying attention. That's what they missed. They saw the result but ignored the observation. They saw the confidence but ignored the lessons. They saw the discipline but ignored the sacrifices. They saw the patience but ignored all the moments when impatience cost you something. They saw the silence but ignored everything you learned while staying quiet. And now they are confused because they cannot identify the person who supposedly changed you. Maybe nobody did. Maybe life did. Maybe consequences did. Maybe every time you made a mistake and refused to repeat it, you changed a little. Maybe every time someone disappointed you and you chose wisdom instead of bitterness, you changed a little. Maybe every time you stopped chasing someone who didn't value you, you changed a little. Maybe every time you chose your long-term future over your temporary comfort, you changed a little. That's how real transformation happens, quietly, repeatedly, without permission, without an audience. And sometimes the most powerful growth is the growth nobody can point to. There was no dramatic moment when you suddenly became unstoppable. There were thousands of ordinary moments when you simply refused to remain the same. You made one better decision, then another, until those decisions became habits. Those habits became standards. Those standards became character. And eventually people started noticing the character. That's when they started looking for the hidden explanation. But they weren't there during the boring part. They weren't there when you were rebuilding your confidence. They weren't there when you were learning to control your emotions. They weren't there when you were practicing patience. They weren't there when you were failing privately and correcting yourself without telling anybody. So let them search. Let them wonder. Let them create complicated stories around something that was actually built through simple choices repeated for a long time. They are looking for the person who transformed you while standing directly in front of the evidence. You didn't need someone to become different. You needed enough reasons to stop becoming the person you used to becoming the person you used, to stop becoming the person you used to be. They keep searching for an explanation because they don't know how to process what they're seeing. They look at your discipline, your patience, your decisions, the way you handle pressure, and they assume somebody must be standing behind you. They keep asking, who's helping you? But the answer has never been hidden. It has been right in front of them. You, not some mysterious person, not some secret advantage, not somebody pulling invisible strings, just you. After finally deciding that your life could not remain dependent on circumstances, approval, or other people's expectations, they didn't notice the change because real change doesn't always announce itself. You didn't wake up one morning and become a completely different person. You changed through repetition. You learned something, applied it, failed again, adjusted again, and kept moving. You stopped waiting for perfect conditions. You stopped expecting everyone to understand your decisions. You stopped telling people everything you were planning, and slowly, the person they were familiar with became harder to recognize. That's what confuses people. They think transformation should have a dramatic explanation. They expect a mentor, a breakthrough, a secret opportunity, a powerful connection, something they can point at and say, that's why. But sometimes there is no single reason. Sometimes there are hundreds. Every disappointment, every mistake, every uncomfortable conversation, every lonely decision, every moment when you had to choose between what felt good now and what would protect your future later. All of it added something. You became more careful because experience taught you to pay attention. You became more patient because rushing had consequences. You became more selective because not everyone who smiles at you is invested in your progress. You became quieter because you learned that explaining yourself doesn't always create understanding. You became stronger because you stopped expecting life to become easier before you were willing to move. And now they see the result. They see someone who doesn't need to react to every comment. Someone who doesn't collapse when plans change. Someone who can hear criticism without immediately losing direction. Someone who can walk away from an opportunity without begging for it. Someone who can sit in uncertainty without desperately grabbing the first answer available. That kind of behavior makes people curious, especially people who remember when you were different. They compare the person you are now with the person you used to be and start searching for the missing piece. They don't realize the missing piece was time. Time spent learning, time spent failing, time spent observing, time spent rebuilding, time spent becoming honest about what needed to change. That's why you don't have to convince them. You don't have to give them a detailed explanation. You don't have to prove that nobody helped you, because the proof is already visible in the way you move. Your consistency says enough. Your restraint says enough. Your standards say enough. Your ability to keep going says enough. The funny thing is, They may have been watching you the entire time. They saw the setbacks. They saw the uncertainty. They saw the quiet periods. They saw you disappear from conversations. They saw you stop chasing certain things. They just didn't understand what those moments were creating. They thought you were falling behind. You were recalibrating. They thought you had lost direction. You were learning which direction actually belonged to you. They thought you were becoming distant. You were becoming selective. They thought you had nothing to say. You were learning when speaking was useful and when silence was smarter. And now they are looking for someone behind your progress, because admitting that you built yourself through all those ordinary moments is harder for them to explain. There is no hidden person they can blame, no secret mastermind they can identify, no shortcut they can copy, just a person who decided to take responsibility for becoming better. That's the uncomfortable truth. You don't need to be extraordinary every day. You need to keep making better decisions. You don't need to know everything. You need to remain willing to learn. You don't need everyone's approval. You need enough self-respect to continue when approval disappears. You don't need to announce every step. You need to take the step. And when they ask again who's helping you, don't rush to satisfy their curiosity. Let them look. Let them analyze. Let them wonder how the person they underestimated became so composed. Because the answer is not somewhere behind you. It isn't hidden in somebody else's hands. It has been in your choices, your discipline, your patience, your failures, your recovery, your silence, your willingness to learn, and every private moment when you chose to become slightly better than the person you were yesterday, right in front of them, the entire time.